Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Ukraine. As we can see, the European Union is doing everything it can with the purpose not to allow the Russians to take under complete control Ukraine, or at least to return back Ukraine in the Russia's area of influence. New European Union members could join without full voting rights. The European Union is discussing the possibility of Ukraine joining with limited rights, according to Politico. The possibility of admitting new members to the Union without full voting rights is being discussed. This is being done to secure Hungary's consent to the admission of new states, including Ukraine. The idea is that new members will receive full rights after the European Union completely overhauls its operating system to make it more difficult for individual countries to veto their decisions. The proposal is in the early stages of development and must still be approved by all existing countries. It could affect not only Ukraine but also Moldova and Montenegro. So we see that the European Union is trying to take Ukraine under control, not to allow Russians to return the state in the area of their influence. Furthermore, we got report that Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, held a telephone conversation with the US Secretary of State Rubio. The Russian Foreign Minister reported the parties discussed possible concrete steps to implement the understandings reached during the talks between Putin and Trump. Later, we got report that possible meeting between Putin and Trump, between Lavrov and Rubio, was postponed for unknown date. So most likely there are going to be no talks and no meetings between neither President of Russia and President of the United States of America, nor between the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Secretary of State. Most likely these meetings are going to happen, but not during the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates, and first let's talk about the Kherson direction. I would like to remind you that during the previous days, we received lots of updates about possible Russian offensive operation in the area of the settlement of Dniprovskaya and the settlement of Sadova. Some sources reported that the Russians crossed the river of Dnipro and managed to capture some positions on the Ukrainian bank of the river. Furthermore, the pro-Russian resources reported that Ukrainians were forced to fall back from this area. And as for the morning of the 21st of October of 2025, we have just this video, and here we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of the settlement of Sadova. So telling the truth, we have some doubts whether the Russians indeed crossed the river of Dnipro, but obviously something big is happening here. Maybe the Russians launched another media attack just with one purpose: to force Ukrainians to keep some reserves and forces in this area and not so allow the Ukrainians to bring these units, let's say, in the direction of the city of Pokrovsk, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. Now let's talk about the situation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians launched another massive offensive operation, massive mechanized attack, this time in the direction of the city by the name of Orekhov. And we got video, we have 2 videos that were published by pro-Ukrainian resources, and this is the first one, and here we can see how Russians were attacking positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement by the name of Mala Takhmachka, which is located to the southeast of the settlement by the name of Orekhov. In this video we can see how Russians were attacking this territory with tanks, with infantry fighting vehicles, with motorcycles. So lots of units and lots of soldiers were involved in this offensive operation. This video, I would like to point to attention, was published by pro-Ukrainian resources, so that is why we can see lots of episodes how Ukrainians were attacking Russian units and vehicles with FPV drones, how many vehicles that were involved in that attack were destroyed by Ukrainians. Anyway, the most important part of this offensive is that several geolocations were located exactly along TO8-15 road in this point, which means that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their position significantly to bypass the former prison, which is located in the southern part of Mala Takhmachka. Most likely, and according to pro-Ukrainian resources, the Russians managed to land infantry, and the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are trying to concentrate the critical mass in this area with the purpose to block the former prison from supply and support. So the Russians are trying to stabilize the situation in the area of Mala Takhmachka, and most likely the Russians managed to complete this task, and now the Russians are tasked to finish the battle for the former prison. If the Russians are able to capture this territory, then most likely Ukrainians will never be able to restore control over this territory. Later we got additional reports that were published by pro-Ukrainian resources that the Russians launched 3 waves of attacks. The first one took place exactly like this. The second wave of attack, the second offensive operation, took place between the settlements of Robotina and Novodanilovka. The Russians were trying to answer this village as well. And the third offensive operation took place between the settlements of Nestyryanka and Novoandriivka. But this attack, according to pro-Ukraine resources, were repelled at the beginning. So as we understand, the Russians managed to achieve some results, and most of the results took place exactly in the area of the settlement of Mala Takhmachka. Now there are very heavy clashes for this territory. The Russians are trying to dig in deeper, to concentrate a critical mass, and to capture this former prison. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, but this might be the beginning of the battle for the city of Orekhov itself. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded according to different mappers. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 20th of October of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 21st of October of 2025. As you can see, the Russians, after they finished the battle for the settlement of Poltavka, began moving further in the western direction, and they captured positions of the armed forces of Ukraine to the west of the settlement. So some true lines and fortifications were captured, and as we discussed in the previous video, from these positions the Russians will try to move further in the western direction to attack the city of Gulyai-Polye itself. Furthermore, the Russians, according to several mappers, established complete control over the village by the name of Novonikolaevka. By the way, the first reports about this progress were published yesterday by several pro-Russian resources. Later, some other pro-Russian resources reported that this update is not correct, and now we have once again a report that Russians captured the territory of the village. At the same time, the sources are saying that the Russians continue offensive operation in the village by the name of Zlagada. I would like to remind you that just yesterday, some pro-Russian sources published a video from the territory of Zlagada, this one, where we can see how 2 Russian soldiers raised the Russian flag in the northern part of the settlement. So based on this video, yesterday we adjusted the map in this part, and now we see that the Russians continue advancing further in the southern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Uspenovka and the Uspenovka fortified area from the northwestern direction. So the front line in this area is continuing crumbling. Most likely Ukrainians will not be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. And by the way, this offensive operation in the area of the city of Orekhov can have purpose to move further in the northern direction with the purpose to cut the Gulyai-Polye and Orekhov from each other, so to cut logistic and supply lines between these 2 strongholds. And this might be, let's say, a plan of the Russian forces, and this will ease the progress of the Russians on the ground to the east of the city of Gulyai-Polye. So this is probably a part of the global Russian Zaporizhzhia offensive operation. Now let's move further, let's discuss the situation in the city of Pokrovsk, and it seems that the city is about to be captured by Russians, at least the southern part. As you can see, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. I would like to remind you once again that this Russian offensive operation started somewhere on the 12th of October of 2025 from Russian attacks in the direction of the city by the name of Mirnograd from the east, and as a result of those clashes, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. So once again, let's take a look at how exactly the map been changed since the beginning of the 12th of October. So let's discuss everything in details, and let's take a look first how exactly the Russians were advancing in this area and how the Russians were taking one block after another of the city of Pokrovsk. You know that obviously this is the final and the major Russian offensive operation, and now the Russians are tasked just with one purpose: to capture the city of Pokrovsk completely, to force the Ukrainians to fall back on the northern part of the settlement, and the most important, the Russians are tasked to create the cauldron, the Mirnograd Chervonograd cauldron. So this is the situation today, more precisely yesterday. This video was published. I believe you remember this video, and there are lots of episodes, probably 10 or 15 episodes of how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation on the territory of the city of Pokrovsk. Yesterday we discovered one geolocation in the area of the railway station. Another geolocation was discovered in the area of the industrial zone in the northwestern part, and today we got another episode also along the railways and in the area of the railway station. Based on this video, we came to the conclusion that the entire central and the western parts of the city of Pokrovsk fell in Russians' hands. Furthermore, several pro-Russian resources and neutral mappers reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the southern and the southeastern parts. So it seems that the city of Pokrovsk, the 50% of the city of Pokrovsk, has already collapsed. The Ukrainians are trying to escape and to retreat from the southern area in the northern direction with the purpose to hold as long as possible the territory along the railways, but it seems that the Russians have already managed to break through some parts of railways, and now the Russians are trying to consolidate their units in the northern part of the city. So the situation is very difficult for Ukrainians, and obviously everything is getting faster and faster. We believe that the city of Pokrovsk will collapse much even faster than everybody expects. Furthermore, today we got report that the Russians also managed to improve their positions in the area of the city of Rodinska. This information was provided by neutral sources. So this is the map that was provided by neutral mappers, and according to this report, the Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the northern and the northeastern parts of the city by the name of Rodinska. The Russians continue their offensive operation. The Russians continue tightening the news around Ukraine positions. Furthermore, we'd like to remind you that Russians have already established complete control over TO 515 road, and currently it's almost impossible to use these roads for evacuation, rotation, logistic. So now Ukrainians are trying to save their lives, as I understand, and the process will become faster and faster. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians managed to also enter the settlement of Shakhovo from the west. Ukrainians were completely defeated in their attempts to cut this breakthrough area, but now we understand that all those Ukrainian attacks in the area of Novotoretsk had just one purpose: to hold positions and to create immediate victory, probably with the purpose to get Tomahawk missiles from the United States of America. But when Trump rejected this idea, Ukrainians realized that there is no need to counterattack and to lose soldiers and units and assets in these battles. So that is why the Ukrainians began retreating. The Russians answered the western part of the settlement of Shakhovo and continue advancing. Most likely in coming days, the village of Shakhovo would be captured by Russians completely, and then Russians will move further in the northeastern direction towards the settlement of Toretsk and Sofiivka. When Russians finish with these two villages, they will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Drushkovka with the purpose to encircle Ukrainians on the territory of the city of Konstantinovka without any chances for evacuation. Furthermore, several neutral mappers reported that Russians also managed to improve their positions to the west of the Kliban-Bytska water reservoir. So as we can see, the Russians also began their offensive operation along N20 road in the northern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Berestokh, which is already the southwestern part of the entire Konstantinovka agglomeration. So as we can see, the Russians are advancing along the entire line of combat contact. The Ukrainians are trying to do everything they can, but we see that they still haven't managed to stabilize the situation, and most likely they will not be able to do this in coming days and in the near future. And now let's talk about the Liman direction. During the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded as well. So this is the situation by the end of the 19th of October of 2025, and this is exactly the moment when Russians began their major offensive operation in the direction of the city of Liman. The Russians are advancing through the forest, at least we got this information from different neutral and pro-Ukrainian sources, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly during the previous 2 days, and now the Russians Russians are just in several kilometers from the city of Liman itself. Furthermore, the Russians continue their intelligence and reconnaissance operation above the city. For example, during the previous 12 hours, the Russians managed to discover another temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine in the forest between the cities of Liman and Slaviansk, and the Russians attacked this territory with aviation. As a result of attack with FAB 1500, the temporary deployment point was completely destroyed. Furthermore, today, starting this morning, we got lots of updates that the Russians began their major offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Stavki. This information was provided by different pro-Russian sources. These sources are telling us, saying that the Russians this morning managed to answer the settlement of Stavki, and currently there are very heavy clashes for this territory. Furthermore, the Russians managed to cut physically the only road between Drobyshevo and Stavki itself. Now Ukrainians don't have any possibilities to support this contingent from the settlement of Drobyshevo, and the Russians established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were trying to move in the direction of Stavki through the fields, through the road between Liman and Slaviansk and Stavki, but the Russians managed to discover this vehicle, and then the vehicle was destroyed with multiple FPV drone attacks. So we believe that in coming days, maybe today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will confirm Russian control over the settlement of Stavki, and right exactly from this very moment, we can say that the second front line for the city of Liman is opened, and the Russians will continue offensive operation also from the northern direction. Currently, the Russians are attacking the city of Liman from the east, and in coming days, the Russians may start offensive operation from the north as well. I'm not sure that Ukrainians will be able to hold their positions for a very long period of time. In 2022, during the first battle, the Ukrainians didn't control positions for several weeks. The same story used to happen with Russians when Ukrainians were counterattacking, and we believe that the same story will be during the third battle for the city as well. And that's it for the short video. A military summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.